Let me start by slightly disagreeing in a way with Sam Faddis. I say just in a way. He said if President Trump wins, we don't need another commission or another think tank to figure out what's going on or what's gone wrong and how to fix it. I do agree with that point, but partly because we've had one for the last 5 years, and that's been this Committee on the Present Danger of China and these World War III conferences. And there have been think tanks for all these years who have been trying to sort this out. And so we don't need a new one. We've had them. And we really have spent the last 5 years trying to understand just how corrupt the country is and just what needs to be done. So let me also thank you all for joining us. It's a Saturday, football's on, college football's on. You know, that's usually what I'm doing on Saturday, if I'm not doing this. But thank you for taking time out. Thank you for the people who are watching it on live stream. I think if you could share it with your family and friends, that would be very important too. Let me start really with kind of a question. Why are we here? Why are we in Allentown? We picked a place that we thought was important in an important state. Allentown, in a way, is part of the experiment, kind of a social experiment, that the country has been going through for the past half century or more. That social experiment began with our economy, with the U.S. economy. And we decided in the United States, when I say we, it was kind of foisted upon the American people, that we're going to have an economy that doesn't require U.S. manufacturing or just a little bit of it. That we were going to export our manufacturing to whoever could manufacture for us cheaper. And we built up over that period other countries over our own. Allentown, Pennsylvania was a huge manufacturing base here in Pennsylvania. It was important for the country. And the country, the people at the Wall Street Journal and the free market economists who misunderstood, even though I believe in free market economics, the free market economists at the time misunderstood free markets because that's not what we had. And we exported our manufacturing base to communist China in a kind of, as I say, social experiment that we took as the highest good the free flow of goods and services over the well-being of the American people, starting with people here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And it just spread to the country more broadly. That kind of experiment, I would humbly argue, as nice as it is here in Allentown, that experiment failed. Donald Trump would not be on the verge of being reelected president were that not so. The American people believe that it is good for the American people to have jobs, that we can engage in free trade with the rest of the world, but that whatever we do has to be for the good of the American people. The American economy, you have the American economy and you have the American worker. The American economy is not there to simply use the American worker. The American worker is meant to be able to be a free participant in that economy. The economy was not created for the good of the economy. The economy was created for the good of the American people. That's something that's been lost. It's supposed to be there for us. We're supposed to be able to engage as free actors in an economy. And the U.S. government and the policymakers in Washington decided we're going to change that dynamic. We're going to export that manufacturing base to other parts of the world without any reference for the good of the American people. And the folks at the Wall Street Journal, and again, I still read the Wall Street Journal, but their overall thinking was, well, those people in Allentown, Pennsylvania, or in Fresno, California, or in Lubbock, Texas, they're going to have to go to school and they're going to have to learn computer programming. and they're going to have to be, part of the new gig economy, the new high-tech economy, and they're just going to have to learn. Not only is that arrogant, it's obnoxious in a variety of ways. If you have a bias towards freedom, people will figure out what it is they can do for a living. That's always been how it's been. But when you decide that you're going to take the ability for an American to work his way or her way into the middle class and export that to communist China, you have engaged in the worst kind of social experiment this country has ever seen. When you combine that with, again, a social experiment of changing our education system, why don't we just teach kids that America is a bad country? That it's a country filled with white men for the good of white men, and that those white men are there to exploit the rest of the country. Why don't we put that in all the history books? And let's see after 50 years whether you have a good country after that, where people like one another. The most popular history book in the United States is still Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. It's used in the local high school, I guarantee it. It's used in the local private school, I guarantee it. It teaches that the country and capitalism is fundamentally evil, that the family is the most sublime prison ever invented by man, that it was a country for landowners in order to exploit the workers. That is what is taught in our children's history books. Again, a kind of social experiment. Or to listen to Trevor, and I love Trevor and believe everything Trevor said. I mean, Howard Zinn was a kind of communist, if not a communist directly. So let's have communists write our history books to teach our children. I think Americans are foolish enough as it is. It doesn't take communists to do that. Modern progressivism is fully capable of dismissing the goodness of the country. But what kind of country are you going to have when you teach your children that it's a bad country? You're going to have a country that doesn't like itself, where this racial divide is going to get magnified every single day. What about religion? We live in a country today where religion is dismissed as some throwback, superstition, that people who believe in religion, let's cut to the chase, Christians, are somehow bad people. They're part of that white system of repression. And so what does the media tell you? The problem in America is white Christian nationalism. If there's anything more ridiculous than that, I don't know what it is. It matters not about our race, our color of our skin. Who cares about the color of our skin? No real American. We're just Americans. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's the thing that unites us, not the color of our skin. And yet the media will have you believe it's white Christian nationalism. Transgenderism. What kind of country would think, if they're in a world war, that we ought to teach our children that whatever sex they are is not necessarily the sex they are? What kind of civilized society would do that? No civilized society would do that. No sensible society would do that. Again, a social experiment designed to destroy the American people, fundamentally. Because if you were in a world war and you thought your country could be lost, that is about the last thing you'd teach anyone. Just out of your own ideas of self-preservation. Which means we've engaged in a kind of suicide. James Burnham talked about the suicide of the West over 50 years ago. We're engaged in that kind of suicide today, and I and my colleagues have been trying to illustrate for our countrymen what that suicide looks like in the hopes that we could avert that suicide. It is a kind of communist revolution we've been living under, where people simply can't comprehend that our elites would present to us this array of policy issues as if they were at all realistic. So the American people are confused. So part of our job has been to try to straighten them out, to try to provide them with support for their common sense, because much of what I have to say, I think everything I have to say, operates at the level of common sense. I'm not trying to say I'm an expert in anything. I don't believe in expertise at a political level. It's not about expertise. It's about common sense. If we cannot understand things commonly, no expert's going to tell us what to do. We Americans, someone says, I'm an expert. Yeah, sure you are. We Americans believe we can govern ourselves because we're human beings with human reason given to us by God. Pure and simple. That's the thing that matters the most in a free society. Can you be self-governing? We are up against it today because that self-governing idea has been destroyed and undermined by this idea that progressive elites are going to run our lives better than we can run them for ourselves. I have the pleasure of serving as chairman of this committee on the present danger China because, again, in a commonsensical way, you look at communist China and you see that they've declared a people's war against the United States, and that in response to that, the American people and our representatives in Congress ought to be responding to that. I think one reason that is not happening is that we misunderstand communist China. Let me be clear, they are a great nation with great ambition. They have 1.4 billion people that are extremely hardworking. We underestimate them the way we underestimated Imperial Japan before World War II. We didn't think that Imperial Japan could cause us the problems they did, but they did. We somehow think that the communist Chinese simply want what we want, which is to make money. We don't think they want to run the world. They spend every year roughly $16 billion on intelligence and influence operations in this country. $16 billion. That's a lot of money. Think what you could do with $16 billion. That's not even counting the $40 billion, Frank mentioned the 300,000 students, Chinese students in American universities. That's $40 billion. So that $16 billion is not even counting that $40 billion. The $16 billion is just for intelligence and influence operations. Most of the events we do in Washington, there is certainly someone from the Chinese Communist Party there. Frank and I have been around Washington, D.C. There'll be Chinese people following us. When I'm in California, that doesn't happen. They can monitor me, I'm sure, electronically. But in D.C., they'll follow us to see who we're meeting with because they want to know. And they have a budget of $16 billion. Now, what do they do with that $16 billion? They've been working with progressive groups in the United States, with transnational corporations, and they have a simple goal, and that is to dismantle the U.S. economy and to subjugate the American military to the Chinese military. If you were a nation and you wanted to control the world, these are the obvious kind of things you'd want to do. They would think, could you dismantle the political system of the United States? What would that take? Well, these Americans like money. Would we, I don't know, offer a job to the president's son, as with Joe Biden? Would we use political organizations and fund those political organizations to get someone like Kamala Harris elected? Or any other of the senators or congressmen around the country? These are not expensive things to do. They just require organization. And you're not going to see Chinese people running around doing it. They're going to give money to Americans in order to do it. Because it's half of the country wants the people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected anyway. So they don't have to do it under their own name. They'll do it under cutouts like American political organizations. How much will President Trump raise this election cycle? How much will congressmen raise? Total, all total, I don't know, $2-3 billion. That's one election cycle. They spend $16 billion a year. Think of the kind of money that they're spending. Obviously, it affects political campaigns. In New York and Washington, try hiring a public relations firm or a law firm or a lobbying firm. They'll already have a contract with either Communist China directly or with a business owned by Communist China, and they will be precluded from working for you, the American citizen. They've bought up the most powerful tools in American politics to influence things. With that influence, they're able to determine the kind of media exposure they get. How often do you turn on the news and see an anti-China story? Almost never. Almost never. In China, they have forced organ harvesting of the Uyghurs. Now, we're led to believe that everybody on the political left cares a lot about human rights. There's how many millions of Uyghurs in concentration camps that are either the men and women are having their organs harvested if need be, a multi-billion-dollar business, or the women are used for sex slavery for the Chinese military. Does that make the news? No. It's not a very favorable story because you go down to Walmart and buy your grandkids, toys are all made in China. And you think, well, gosh, could those people be doing these bad things? Could they be building a military to be used against us? Could they be preparing for war with the American people? As was said earlier, I believe, they declared a people's war against the United States in 2019. Within 6 months of that, May of 19, within 6 months of that, COVID-19 was spreading throughout China. Within 6 months of that, America was in lockdown. Within 6 months of that, November of 2020, we had to conduct an American election using mail-in ballots, forever altering how we run elections here. Half the country thinks the election in 2020 was stolen. In Pennsylvania here, you're also going to have mail-in ballots this fall, as in many parts of the country. The ability of Communist China to influence the election because of that, I have argued, is unfortunate, but real. Could they print up somewhere here in Allentown 1 million ballots for the state of Pennsylvania? They have printers, they have computers. They can print up 1 million ballots, they can fill them out, they can get them in the system. Could they change the election that way? Absolutely. Are we trying to stop that? Absolutely. We don't know really what the political results were in 2020 under these circumstances. You say that, and the news story is, well, these have been thoroughly debunked. Come on. Really? Debunked by whom? We're in a political war with the Communist Chinese. Would they spend a portion of what they spend in the United States to have influence? Would they spend it on trying to steal an American election? I fear so. Can we outvote that, steal the American people? I pray so. We didn't have this during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. They weren't engaged in this, and we weren't using mail-in balloting. COVID-19 broke American politics. Donald Trump represented a fundamental challenge to the Communist Party of China that we're still dealing with today. Let me conclude with this. We're going to decide over the next 2 weeks the future of this country. If it's going to be stolen, if it's close, it'll be stolen, I predict, unfortunately, if it's close. And it'll be stolen because the ability to have a free and fair election has been fundamentally altered by two things. One, the use of mail-in ballots. Two, any system that is electronic can be manipulated. Elon Musk said this the other day. He goes, I don't trust computers. I build computers. I am using them all the time. I understand what's going on. This is not right. I will refer you, which I am fond of doing, to a HBO documentary called Kill Chain: The Cyber War Against American Elections. And it's a documentary that came out in March of 2020. So think of the time frame, March of 2020. After COVID, sort of during the lockdowns, but before the fall election, obviously. In Kill Chain, you have a group of Democrats named Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, Ron Wyden, Elizabeth Warren, and others, that were talking about the vulnerability of our voting system to electronic manipulation. The Democrats were positing at the time that the Russians were going to steal the election for Donald Trump. After the documentary came out, Kamala Harris gave a press conference where she said she had been shown how these things operate, and indeed the system was very vulnerable and we have to return to paper ballots. We have the election of 2020, and all of a sudden the machines are absolutely perfect. This was the fairest election in the history of the country, and anybody who would challenge that in any way, shape, or form was an election denier and should be subject to prosecution in various parts of the country. We're going to have an election that is not much different than 2020, except for the fact that the American people have woken up to everything that's going on. They see that the policies of this administration have been harmful to their way of life. They see that the world is on fire, whether it's Ukraine or Israel or just here in the United States with our open border. The American people think something is wrong. There will be an opportunity for the American people to have their voice heard in a few weeks, or today, even if you want to do early voting in various parts of the country. If our voice can fairly be heard, and I say that, I'm not saying vote for Trump, vote for Harris, I'm saying if our voice can fairly be heard, the American Republic can hold together. If I thought for a moment the election was fair and Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or whoever was running, or Donald Trump, whoever, if I thought it was a fair election and my countrymen thought it was a fair election, they would nod their head, they would accept that person as the winner. If they lost, they would think they needed to make better arguments next time. If they won, they would do everything to help heal the country of the division we find ourselves in. It is the kind of common sense we have as an American people. It's how we think about these kind of elections. If it's not a fair election and the American people think it's stolen, you'll have the basis for a kind of disintegration of the American Republic, where people think their voice is no longer heard. They'll think they don't have a republic. Those are the conditions where you could have a civil war. And the communist Chinese would like nothing more than that. The communists that Trevor was talking about would like nothing more than that. Whatever else is true of what happens in a few weeks in the election, we have to remember, we, the American people, still own this country. It's still our country. We have to keep it together. That is the thing we have to be fighting for, the American Republic, and do everything in our power to make it so. Thank you, and thank you for being with us.